Welcome back to Insider. I'm Maayan Hoffman, executive editor of ILTV News. Tonight, we're talking about the role of Christian Zionists in shaping Israel's future and how U.S.-Israel relations are evolving under Ambassador Mike Huckabee's leadership. It's been just around 100 days since Huckabee took office, and already we've seen both strong support and some moments of tension. To help us unpack it all, I'm joined by Ilse Strauss from Bridges for Peace and Pastor Trey, ILTV Christian correspondent. And just to note, I also had a longer conversation with Pastor Graham today. You'll be able to catch that full interview on the ILTV News podcast later this week. So let's get started. Ilse, I want to start with you. About 100 days, Ambassador Huckabee has been here in the country. How do you assess the first part of his tenure?
Well, I would say in a word, it's been eventful. 2 weeks, just under 2 weeks of those 100 days have been spent fighting a war that will go down in history. A war that was shaped as a partnership between Israel and the U.S., and a war that Ambassador Huckabee obviously played a key part in. So talk about eventful. And looking back at his 100 days, he just mentioned that he is very proud of the accomplishments, and for good reason. A lot of accomplishments. Operation Midnight Hammer. After discussing taking out Iran's nuclear abilities for over a decade, it was actually acted upon in his tenure. There's also been the hostage, Idan Alexander, reunited with his family. Ambassador Huckabee has also spoken about reuniting all the remaining hostages with their families, something that has not been accomplished yet. And he's emerged as one of the strongest voices of support for Israel at a time when a number of other world leaders are singing the exact opposite tune. So yes, I believe he has reason to be proud.
100% and 100, with 100 days and 100% right what Elsa is saying. How would you react to that as well, Pastor Graham? Do you feel like Huckabee is doing the job that you expected him to do as the first evangelical Christian to serve in this role?
He is the first evangelical Christian, and that background guides who he is and what he says. He's also very careful to remind people that he works for the president and his policies are Donald Trump's policies. So he's trying to make sure people understand that he has a boss, and the boss is the one who's guiding these things. But his Bible-based value system, his spiritual value system, is what allows him to speak the language.
So would you say that it was a good idea for the Jewish state to have a Christian ambassador like this in place?
Well, I think it's a great thing for the Jewish state to have an ambassador who loves the Jewish people and loves the Jewish state. So I think it's a beautiful thing that he's a Christian evangelical, but simply the fact that he's a Bible believer and a supporter of God's covenant, so he understands the spiritual background besides just the political situation.
But now, Ilse, you named all of the really wonderful things that have happened under Huckabee so far, but there have been some moments of tension. One of them, of course, was when there was a false report that settlers, people living in Judea and Samaria, had set fire to a church in Taipei, which, of course, turned out to be untrue. But at the time, Huckabee actually visited Taipei and then put out a very scathing report, not naming the Jews specifically, but saying that anybody who had conducted such an act should be punished. In addition, we know there's been a long-standing issue in terms of Christians and others getting the religious visas needed to work in the country. That shifted even more severely in January with some bureaucratic changes. And rather than that being dealt with sort of under the table, there was a leak of a letter from Huckabee to the Minister of Interior, which not only called him out, but actually called on Christians and said, if this isn't resolved, maybe you won't come to Israel. So how do you explain that?
Well, Maayan, I think in any good relationship, in any good, solid relationship, be that a marriage, a friendship, a partnership, there are always issues of disagreement. There are always tensions. But these do not define the relationship. What's defined by it is how you move forward, how you go through these and then resolve going forward. The best relationships I know, they're not without their tensions. This one not. And this is what I saw in this, and this is what I hope going forward.
Do you agree with that? I mean, he represents the president. Maybe was this a message from Trump, or you believe this was Huckabee's doing?
Well, the fire at the church that you mentioned is a good example of a situation that you need to do all of your homework, you need to do all of your research. Any pronouncements or press releases that are done ahead of time often can come back and embarrass you afterwards. And so I think that's a lesson that all politicians need to learn, and that is to be a little careful, a little slower on the draw. And the situation with the visas, I know that your organization was a part of that discussion, was it not?
No.
Okay.
No,
well, the question about the visas is that Christian workers, Christian volunteers want to be here. And so the Ministry of Interior is the organization that processes those things. And so Ambassador Huckabee, of course, wants to ensure that that process continues so that those who want to come here and serve in the land are able to do so.
Which, of course, makes sense. And as he said, I think many times he didn't want special treatment for the Christian visitors, just that it would run smoothly, which, of course, it wasn't. That the process
would not be discriminated against.
100%. Right. But now, on a more broader level, U.S.-Israel relations do seem to be going very well. In fact, I would say at a government level, they're probably on an all-time high. But when you look at the general people living in America, that might look a little bit different. From your perspective, both in terms of the general evangelical Christian community and the American community at large, how are U.S.-Israel relations doing, Pastor Graham?
Well, it depends on where you are in your value system. It depends on where you are in your faith journey, in your political stance. Those who believe in the Bible, those who stand with God, understand that this is the place of the Bible. This is the chosen land for the chosen people. And if you reject God and reject the Bible, you're going to reject the covenant. If you stand with covenant, you're going to stand with the land and stand with the people of Israel. And so you're seeing a separation. There's not a lot of middle ground anymore. People are having to choose sides. It's a political war, but it's a spiritual war. And people are having to choose sides, and you can tell their public stance comes out of where their heart is.
Well, but it's also not just within, these big protests on the college campuses where we're seeing the anti-Semitism and the anti-Israel, but even within the MAGA movement, there's a growing amount of anti-Semitism and anti-Israel sentiments. What's really happening there? And do you believe that Huckabee could potentially play a role in rectifying that as a pro-Israel American voice actually in the land?
Absolutely. It's an unfortunate reality. We are seeing anti-Israel sentiment rising, even in demographics that used to be historically very pro-Israel. And this is ascribed to a simple misinformation. I mean, social media is an absolute cesspool of misinformation. And even those of us who know better, we shouldn't look to social media for historic, for facts, for history, for current events. We know better, but still they don't do their research. Instead, we look to 30-second clips, something taken out of context, and framed so emotive that even those who have stood with Israel traditionally, you can't help but be affected by that. Now, I think the answer to that, education, education, education. People in authority speaking out, and that is where Ambassador Huckabee comes in. Over the past 100 years, he's been a tremendous voice of support. In terms of education, yes, there are so many excellent programs out there, and still it seems like we need more. One of the things that I think we should look into is bringing people to Israel. Come and see. It's one thing to watch something on social media. It's completely a different thing to be here. Bring those accusations. Israel being an apartheid state, come, check it out. Don't be a parrot. Become a witness.
And certainly that's something I know that both of you try to do, both from Bridges for Peace and also, Pastor Graham, you bring another number of trips here and even serve sometimes as a tour guide. But, just to sort of piggyback on all of this, in Texas itself, there's been a tremendous amount of growing anti-Israel sentiments. I mean, you and I spoke earlier, and people can watch that on the ILTV News podcast, but we spoke about the conference that was supposed to be held in Texas a few months ago. That was canceled because of extremist threats, and there was a fear that there might be a security threat to the people at the conference, and the municipal government, the law enforcement, didn't feel capable of stopping that threat. Now, if that's happening in a state like Texas, what's happening in a state like California? How do you explain this shift in a place like Texas?
Well, those who stand for evil, those who stand for defeating the land and the people of Israel, they're going to make their voices heard. And so those who stand with Israel need to speak up. And sadly, it is the violent, the threatening, the hateful that often have the loudest voice. And that's what you're seeing. So the volume is not the same as the percentages. The percentage of people who believe that Israel is in the right, especially when you're talking about a terrorist group like Hamas, the percentage of people who believe that Israel is in the right is overwhelmingly a majority. But they don't feel the need or the responsibility or even the necessity to speak out. But those who are so hateful, those who are standing with terrorists, are very loud, and they take it upon themselves to impose their views on other people.
But I do have to push back a little bit, Pastor Graham, because when you're looking at some of the newer surveys, you're starting to see that while in the aggregate that might be true, especially when you're looking at younger populations, it's not necessarily so much true anymore. They are shifting to be more pro-Palestinian. So, I mean, would you align with Pastor Graham is saying, or do you think there's even more that has to be done, or that this is scarier than he makes it sound?
To a degree, I agree with Pastor Graham. I believe that those of us who stand for Israel, we are in the majority, or we might have been before October 7th. But October 7th and the ensuing war changed everything. And the misinformation that I mentioned on social media, I believe that has shifted. Seeing all these emotive scenes on social media has shifted what was historically a pro-Israel stance. And for that, we need those education programs. We need to speak out loudly. And those of us who thought, well, yes, I stand with Israel, but it's something that I'll keep inside, and I can afford to stay silent because it's not an issue. This is the time that we need to speak out. You can no longer sit on the fence about this. And those of us who thought it was okay to remain silent, you need to make your voice heard, even if it's just in a small sphere of influence, social media, at work, at your church, on college campuses. You need to speak out, because otherwise that wave of anti-Israel, anti-Semitic drivel, it's going to wash away truth completely.
Which is a very scary sentiment. And even the definition of what is the state of Israel. Ambassador Huckabee, which is sort of the premise of this show today, he's a very big supporter of Judea and Samaria, right? He was even pushing that, and we had some other visitors from the White House who have come and have said, we want to see Jewish rights, Jewish life in Judea and Samaria, which is something that is obviously contested both in Israel itself and certainly around the world, where people are getting ready. Many, many countries, 8 are ready. I was in Ramallah recently, and the foreign minister said that there are another 10 countries interested in supporting a Palestinian state and recognizing it in September at the UN General Assembly. So what are your thoughts, Ilse? I mean, do you believe that it would be good for Israel at this stage to annex or push sovereignty over Judea and Samaria?
Well, yeah, that's a controversial question, right? And as Christian Zionists, we believe that Judea and Samaria, that's the epicenter, that's the biblical heartland, man. That's where everything happened. The fingerprints, the footsteps of the ancient biblical figures, that's there. So you ask us, should Judea and Samaria be part of Israel? A resounding yes. That's us. This is a decision that Israel will have to make on its own. You guys need to decide this. We will be behind you.
Pastor Graham?
I think that's an excellent answer. The question, do we support it biblically and historically? 100% yes. And I believe to the average American Christian, it's not even a question. Of course that's part of Israel. Of course that's part of the Holy Land, because it is where the Bible took place. So if Israel and their government asks me, I say yes. Now, I understand that's exceedingly complicated. Are you giving the people their citizenship or not? Are they going to be residents or not? It's complicated. Every big policy change like that is complicated. But from a fundamental biblical perspective, yes, Judea and Samaria is Israel.
But Pastor Graham, you wear a lot of hats, not just pastor, and there's a big diplomatic fallout that could come as well. Do you think it is risky for the future of the state of Israel to take control of land that is biblically and correct? 100%, it is part of the biblical map, and certainly, as Ilse said, everything important pretty much happened there, certainly not in Tel Aviv. But what could that mean to Israel's future?
Well, there's a principle that you should not live in fear. Mm-hmm. And the fear for Israel was, what's the UN or the world going to say about this or that? If we move the embassy to Jerusalem, what's the world going to do? If we bomb Iran, what is the world going to do? Israel is going to be condemned by the world no matter what. They should do what is right and what is best for them and their people, and the world will have to live with it.
Now, some people do say that Christians are really pushing that agenda onto Israel and maybe even pushing their theological agenda, wanting to get all the Jews back here and bring some kind of new end of days about, and maybe even do some proselytizing in the land. How do you respond to people that are nervous about those things?
Well, there certainly is that. I'm not going to deny that. But many of those theological pushing, it has at its heart a big anti-Semitic thrust. So those who push that, really, they need to examine where it comes from. What is their intent with that? And that I cannot speak for. What I can speak for is myself, my family, Bridges for Peace, and the millions of Christians that we represent. We stand with the God of Israel, and therefore we stand with the people and the land of Israel. And we stand with you not because you're perfect and fantastic, and which you are.
Well, I was just going to say, I don't know.
But you're human. It's not like we expect you to be superhuman. We stand with you because we stand with the God of Israel. But in this, we know that this is a war between light and darkness, but Israel is leading the charge on the side of light. And therefore, we are where we should have been right throughout history, by your side.
It's such a strong sentiment, and anti-Semitism, just like all the anti-Israel sentiment that we're talking about from the governments worldwide, is running rampant across the United States. Pastor Graham, what role then, hearing what Ilse just said, can Christian Zionists play to help reduce the anti-Semitism in the United States?
Well, to carry on with her thought, one thing Christians can do is recognize our history and repent of our history. Now, it wasn't us personally, it wasn't our generation, but for generations, Christians around the world are guilty of anti-Semitism. And we should acknowledge that. And we should proudly, boldly state that is not of God. That is not biblical. And we who are followers of Yeshua, followers of Jesus, our faith is grounded here. And without the Jewish people, we have no Savior. And so we stand with the people of Israel because they are the family tree of our Savior. And so anti-Semitism has no place in the church.
And what role should Christians be playing when it comes to policy in Israel? What amount of influence should you have on the government and the politicians?
Well, friends can give friends advice. And friends who are smart and educated and have good ideas and wise solutions should offer those things. But the Christian world, the American government, should not be giving orders to the Israeli government. The Israeli government is responsible for the decisions of your country. So while we give advice or counsel, we should pray for wisdom and discernment, but we don't have decision-making power.
And I mean, Trump in the White House is obviously getting a lot of his backing from this large evangelical community. I've heard 60 to 80 million, right, evangelical Christians in the United States. It's quite a large population, certainly his base. Political winds can shift very quickly. We have a midterm, then we're going to have, elections again for a new president in a few years. We saw what happened under the Biden administration. Is there not a little bit of a fear that Israel might take it too far with the backing it has today, but when it shifts, a lot of this could be undone?
Well, the other side of that is take the opportunity while you have it. Make decisions, make changes, make policy choices now when you have a supportive government, and then literally only God knows who the next president of the United States is going to be. So you, as an Israeli government, you may regret waiting. This might be your best chance to make some of the decisions that you want to make. And if you have a supportive government in America, this might be the time to make those decisions.
Ilse, if there was a decision that the Israeli government should make now under the current administration, what would it be?
Well, there's a lot of decisions that the administration can make now. Maybe they need to look into Judea and Samaria. That could be something that might work now. Golan Heights, Judea and Samaria is definitely first on the agenda, I would say.
Do you agree?
I think Judea and Samaria is the issue of the time, yes.
So thinking about, in our final sentiments, for about a minute or so, I want you just to end with some kind of sentiments about what really motivates you yourself personally. How do you reconcile your faith and the political realities on the ground in this day and age, as you said, with this administration for such a time as this? Ilse, you start.
Well, if I have to sum up the world today in just one sentence, it's raging against the existence of God. They rage against God. They don't want God to exist. They want to be God themselves. And here you are, this tiny strip of land and people between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, and you thrive. You exist against all odds. You exist as proof that God exists, that he is who he says he is, that he does what he says he will do no matter how long it takes. Is it any wonder that a godless world rages against the proof of his existence?
Do you believe that that can change?
It depends on whether the world changes towards a more godly world and just accept the fact that he exists. If God exists, Israel is fine to exist. The raging against Israel is against the raging of the existence of God. It's a spiritual war, like Pastor Graham said. The war has been, world leaders like to say, oh, the Israel-Palestinian question is the question of our generation. That's not so. This war has been raging for generations throughout history, and this is just the current episode that we're seeing playing out before us. We are arrogant if we think this is the question of our generation, that is just a stand-alone. This is a battle between darkness and light, and Israel is fighting it's leading the charge on behalf of light.
And unfortunately, with such a strong sentiment, we are going to have to end the show tonight. That's all the time that we have for Insider. My thanks to Ilse Strauss and Pastor Trey Graham for joining us, and to you, our viewers, for being part of the conversation. You can always watch us on Stream REL, our 24/7 streaming channel. Download the ILTV app or sign up for our newsletter at iltv.tv. I'm Maayan Hoffman. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.